Today we are going to have storytelling led by Keepers of the Culture. We have Mama Carla Wiley with us here, and I'm just going to give a little introduction to Keepers of the Culture and Mama Carla Wiley. So Keepers of the Culture is Philadelphia's Afrocentric storytelling group. They're committed to telling the stories of the African and the African in America experience. Their motto states, "Our mission is telling the story, claiming our glory." So we have Mama Carla Wiley on the line with us today. It's such a pleasure to have you again. It's been some time. So Mama Carla Wiley, also known as Mom Reed, is a librarian, storyteller of folk tales, real tales, and historical events. Hi, Mama Carla Wiley.
Hi.
So a share of stories for everyone and all ages. So without further ado, I will turn over the program to Mama Carla for her wonderful storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Hotu Jambo Watoto. Habarasa Asabuki. So you're going to say, okay, Mama Carla, what are you talking about? The language that I was speaking to you in is Kiswahili. Kiswahili is a language that's used throughout Kenya and Tanzania and all throughout Africa. It's one of the easiest African languages to speak and to learn. We love to speak to everyone in native tongues from Africa as a tribute to our ancestors. But today, we're going to talk about being in Philadelphia, particularly community in Philadelphia. Now, a lot of people, when they think about community, they think maybe people who live up the block from you or a couple of doors down. But what is community really? And that's what a lot of the stories that I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to tell you 3 stories in all. And all 3 of these stories have to do with Philadelphia community. First, we're going to talk about who's very close to you at Germantown Academy. At the end of Germantown Avenue, before Germantown Avenue turns into something else, there is a house. It's called Stetton House. And in Stetton House, there was a woman who lived there. In fact, a lot of her life. She came there as a teenager, and her name was Dinah. Now, if you go along Germantown Avenue, if you look at the old YWCA building, you will see a picture of Dinah. And everybody says, well, who is Dinah? I'm going to tell you about Miss Dinah. Again, as I said, Miss Dinah came to Germantown, to the Logans in particular, as a young girl. She was an enslaved woman. But James Logan, who owned Stetton House, he became a Quaker. And he was compelled to free his people of color. And even though Dinah was freed, she had adopted Stetton as her home. And she stayed there. But all during the Revolutionary War, the people who lived at Stetton, people who owned it, the Logans, they were in and out because they didn't want to be, they were Quakers and they didn't want to be where people were fighting. So they would come there and stay sometimes, but who was there all the time? Miss Dinah. Not only Miss Dinah, but her grandson and her husband when he was alive and her daughter. Well, one particular night, which is how we know so much about Miss Dinah. One particular night during the Revolutionary War, some British soldiers were drinking not too far away from Stetton House, and they were walking along the road and they hollered up to the window, "Hey, gal!" And she looked out the window and she knew that the British soldiers were going around burning down houses, particularly houses of very rich people. And she said, "Yes, sir." They said, "Where's your mistress and master?" "Ain't nobody here but me, sir." Maybe we need to burn this place down. Come on. he said to his friend. Well, as I said, the two men had been drinking, so they were walking a little wobbly. And they went into the barn. Now, Miss Dinah was very smart. She ran up and she locked them in the barn. And then she ran back to the house, not sure what she was going to do next. But she didn't have to think very long. There were British generals that were out looking for deserters. And she said, sirs, there are two rascals that are locked in the barn. And they's deserters. They up there filling themselves with drink. The general said, thank you, miss, and went and seized those two men out of the barn and took them off to jail. Now, in that way, Miss Dinah saved Stenton House because Stenton House was important during that time. You see, the Logans were abolitionists. They also kept so many papers that were important to the new nation that was being formed. And Dinah became a hero, or a shero, as we like to say. Now, Miss Dinah and her story is being told over and over again. They're getting ready to make a special monument just to her. So if you ever get down to the end of Germantown Avenue, you should stop in Stenton House because it's open to the public and you can find out a lot more about James Logan and his family. Now that's the first kind of community. What's important about the community that Dinah said is that she saw this place, even though she was the housekeeper there, as her home. And she took good care of it. Now, do we have any questions about Miss Dinah? When did Miss Dinah die? They're not really sure when she died. No, she is not still alive. She was alive during the 1700s. They think that Miss Dinah died sometime in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And is there in a book? Yes, there are several books. I will try to get you a list to your teachers of the books that contain stories about Miss Dinah. They're finding more and more things about her every day. They are not sure when Miss Dinah was born. Back then, people of color, they didn't often keep a record of their birth dates. Who was her husband? Her husband's name was William, and he also lived on Stenton. When was the night she saved the house? Oh, you have great questions. Stenton House is near, I believe, is near Germantown Academy, and you spell her name Dinah, D-I-N-A-H, Dinah. Oh, was she proud? Yes, she was very proud. And not only was she a very proud woman, she was a kind woman. Did she live in Africa? No, more than likely, Miss Dinah was born on Barbados or one of the colonies because she was a little bit, I don't think that she was born in Africa. I think she was born on one of the islands and then was brought to the United States. Oh, such great questions. Now, the next part of the community that we're going to talk about is about the community around Mother Bethel, which was one of the oldest free Black communities in our nation. Now, there was a man who was a banquet manager. Now, banquet managers, we know them now as caterers. His name was Robert Bogle. Now, the reason why Robert Bogle was so important is Robert Bogle was an enslaved man who earned his way out of, who basically bought his freedom. And when Mr. Bogle bought his freedom, He also tried to help other people who were enslaved to buy their freedom as well. As a banquet manager, he was always looking for the best cooks in Philadelphia because Philadelphia was known as a party town. It's still kind of known as a party town, really. But they always had these great big parties. And Robert Vogel, he was the one who hired the cooks, made sure that everything was dressed up really beautiful, and just got everything together. Well, because he was always looking for the best cooks, he would go around to the back doors of the big houses and he would say, I smell something wonderful that you're cooking in here. You think I might have a taste? Now, all the cooks, they knew Mr. Bogle, and it was the pride of these men and women to let someone taste their food. So he would come in and he would taste a little bit of the food, and he would always look for their best dish. And of course, the cook would always make sure that they offered their best dish. Now, this particular young lady, her name was Hanna. And Hanna felt as though her best dish was her pepper pot soup. Pepper pot soup is a very, very old African tradition soup. It has a very light broth, and it's made with something that's called tripe, which is the stomach of a cow or a pig. And it's made with all these different vegetables and peppers, very hot peppers. But it's a very good soup if someone isn't feeling well, and it helps them to get well very quickly. In Philadelphia, they used to actually sell soup on the streets like they sell hot dogs. You'd get a little bowl, and they would put some of the pepper pot soup in, and you would drink it. You pay the person, and you would drink it, and then you would give them the bowl back, and they would clean the bowls and give other people some soup. Now, Hanna made the best pepper hot soup on South Street. Everyone liked Hanna's pepper pot soup. And when Mr. Bogle came that day and he tasted her soup, he said, Miss Hanna, I'm going to go talk to your mistress. And I'm going to ask her if you could come and cook for me. And Hanna, if you do a good job, I'll make sure that you have some money too. This way you can buy your freedom. Oh, Hanna was so excited. And it didn't take her long before she had earned enough money to buy her freedom. Now, her mistress wasn't particularly happy about getting rid of her best cook, but it was wonderful for her to know that she had someone who was in such demand. But when Hanna became a free person, she also met a young man. He was a blacksmith, already a free man of color, and he made some of the most beautiful ironwork in Philadelphia. And when Hanna married William, they had a wonderful home. It was small, and it was just on the side of the stable, but it was theirs. And they didn't have to answer to anyone, for they had their free papers. Free papers were very important, because if you didn't have free papers, you could be taken to the South, where you might not ever be seen again. You were most likely worked to death. The problem, though, was that you couldn't get free papers until you were 18. And so the community in Philadelphia had to be very careful about looking out for their children. Because you see, because children didn't have free papers, if they were snatched by folks that were called patty rollers and were taken to the South, there was a good chance that they would never be seen again. And so the community looked out for the children. The children were known by everyone, and the children knew everyone in their community. And if there were patty rollers or kidnappers who would come to take small children, they would usually take children around the ages of 8 or 9, children who could go and work. They would make sure that the children would know where to go for safety and where to hide. This is about Hanna and William's daughter, Addie Mae. One day, Addie Mae was sitting in the kitchen with her mother as her mother was cooking. Her mother was getting a special dish together for Mr. Bogle, her employer. And she said, Addie Mae, you sit right there. You make sure that you roll those things good. You hear? Yes, Mama. But you know what? This would taste good with some of that gooseberry jelly. Gooseberry jelly? Yes. Miss Shiloh has some. I'll go get some for you. No, Addie. You stay right there. But it's just up the street, Mama. I know. But I told you that there are patty rollers, and they are taking children away. You have to stay here where you're safe. Okay, Mama. And she sat there, and she sat and made the rolls, but she was kind of upset. Then all of a sudden, she heard another knock at the door. And her mother said, come in. And one of the young boys who lived along the lane, his name was Erool. He said, Miss Hanna, they're chasing me. They're patty rollers. Help me, please. Now, Hanna looked around, and drying by the fire were some skirts that she would wear when she would do her banquet work. She grabbed the skirt and she put it over the boy's head, and she grabbed a bonnet and put it on his head and said, sit over there with Addie Mae, and not a word. You hear me? Act like you're helping. Next few minutes, there was another knock at the door. Ma'am, we're looking for a runaway boy. There are no boys in this house, just me and my daughters. Are you sure you ain't seen no boy? I'm sure. Man looked inside, and he saw what he thought was two girls sitting helping their mother to cook. Okay. Well, thank you very much, ma'am. You're welcome, sir. And he left out the house. And at first, Erool went to get up, and she put her finger to her mouth. Just a few more minutes, they heard a turn of the door. It was William. He was coming in for his lunch. He said, who are those men that I saw walk up, darling? They're patty rollers. And who was that? He said, looking over for what he thought was a girl. Erool tipped his head just a little bit and looked around at Mr. William. And he said, Erool? Is that you? Yes, sir. I told him to stay here. The patty rollers, they were chasing him. Yeah, I still see those men. They out on the street. Stay here, son. Just came to grab my lunch. I'll give you all a signal, a low whistle, when they're gone. Thank you, darling. And William kind of looked over at Erool and smiled. Erool kind of looked a little shy. He hated that he had to dress up like a girl. Well, when William went back out with his lunch, Hanna waited, and she kept cooking. She kept peeking out the window, and all of a sudden they heard two low whistles. It was all clear. And then there was another knock at the back door. It was Mr. Hopkins. He was a black lawyer. He said, is Erool here? Yes, sir. I'm right here. And Erool took off the bonnet and slipped out of the skirt. He said, you were lucky that Miss Hanna was home. Boy, why were you out? Mama's sick. I just went to get her some soup. And then they started running after me. They were following me up the street. Well, I'll walk you home so you'll be safe. Your mother has her soup. I took it to her this morning. Come along, son. Thank you, Miss Hanna. You're welcome. Take care, Erool. Thank you, Miss Hanna. Bye, Addie Mae. Bye, Erool. When the two men had gone, and Addie turned around and she looked at her daughter and she said, see, darling, that's why I told you. You have to be careful. Now, that Sunday at church, after they finished praising the Lord, the whole church sat down. They went to Mother Bethel, the mother church. And they got to talking to them about what to do if the patty rollers came. They helped each child to know of safe places that they could go to, places where they could hide if the patty rollers came. They told them to try not to be by themselves, but if they were alone, what to do. It was so scary. But the children were rarely alone, and they always knew someone along their route. But one particular day, when Hanna had a lot to do, she had to send Addie Mae down to get some fresh vegetables. And she told her, now, Addie Mae, remember what you were told in church. Remember what Daddy and I said. Yes, Mama. Don't worry. I'll be safe. She took her basket in hand and she went to walk down, just a few blocks down, to where fresh fruits and vegetables were being sold. But when she got halfway up the street, she felt strange, like someone was following her. She turned around. She saw that there were two men that she didn't know who were walking behind her. She walked a little faster, and they walked a little faster. And then Addie Mae knew that these must be patty rollers. She thought in her mind what she was told to do. They were hiding places, places where there were big stacks of crates, and behind the crates there were little cubbies where the children could hide. She walked, and then she ran. And she ran to where one of the hiding places were, and she eased herself down. She stayed really still and quiet. The men ran past, and they looked all around. She could barely breathe. She was so scared. She knew not to come out, not right away, for they'd be waiting for her. The men kept going back and forth, looking for places that she might be hidden. Now, Mr. Fletcher, who was a white owner of one of the stores, came out. He was smoking his pipe, and he walked near the crate where Addie Mae was. And he said quietly, don't worry, Addie. Stay right there. I'll send my son out when it's all clear. He took another puff of his pipe, and he walked back in the store. Addie waited for what seemed like ages. It was only maybe 10 minutes, until Mr. Fletcher's son came out. He walked over to the crates and he said, Addie, it's all clear. Come on, Daddy will walk you home, and I'll go get whatever you needed from the store. Thank you, Michael. You're welcome. Mr. Fletcher walked Addie Mae back to her mother and told her mother what happened. Hanna held her daughter very close and said, oh, thank you so much, Mr. Fletcher. It's not a problem. My son is going to bring those vegetables for you, Miss Hanna. Needn't worry. Let me get back to my store now. And remember, Hanna looked at Addie Mae and looked her in her face and said, babe, this is why we have community. People to help us when we're afraid. Are you okay? She hugged her daughter very close. She said, yes, Mommy, but I was so scared. She said, I know you were, darling. It's okay. Now, Addie Mae grew, and she finally turned 18 and had her free papers. And as a free woman of color, Addie helped in her community, just like other free women. You see, community is important. Community keeps people safe. That's why it's important for us to know the people in our community, to know the safe places, to know people who can help us if there's a problem, but also to help others. Ashe, Ashe. Now, I know that you're going to ask me if Addie and Hanna were real people. Not necessarily, but Robert Bogle was a real person. He was a caterer in Philadelphia, a very famous caterer. Let's see what other questions you guys have. Oh, is there a day where we celebrate Dinah? No, but that is a good idea. I think we should talk to our city fathers about that. Did Dinah have any children? Yes, she did. She had a daughter, and she took care of her grandson, actually. Dinah was in her late 30s, early 40s when she saved Stanton House. Dinah actually died of natural causes. We do not know who Dinah's parents were. How did they create African soup? It was with peppers and onions, and they would make a broth from carrots and other root vegetables, and they would boil it in a pot. It was really good. How many patty rollers were there? There were quite a few. They were actually a gang of men who would go around and basically kidnap children. In the story, the boy Erool was about maybe 14, 15 years old. Why do people want to work to take kids away? Well, back then, they thought of people of African descent as being property. So they could get money for them. So they would go and look for children who weren't, and these people were not, they thought they were doing a job. And they felt that because these children didn't have free papers, it was easy for them to claim that they were just runaways that they had captured. And like I said, they think of Black and brown people as like cattle or things that they could exchange for money. And some people like money a lot, and they didn't really care that they were taking human beings. They didn't even think of Black people, some of them, as human beings. Somebody asked me about the ironwork that William did. If you walk downtown, especially around South Street and other small streets in Center City, you'll see a lot of beautiful ironwork. And that was made by people like William. The ironwork in Philadelphia was known as one of the most beautiful ironwork in the country. It was really beautiful. Again, Addie is one of my inventions, but who knows who she married as she grew up. Lost track of her. The question is, what year did all of this happen? I'd say the middle 1700s, right before the Revolutionary War. Are there still kidnappers in the North? Blessed, no, that doesn't happen nowadays. We still have, just like in anything, where there's always good people and bad people. And we still need community, and we still need to look out for one another. But no, it's not like it used to be, because, at one point, what they were doing was legal. Patty rollers, they would come up on trains from the South, and they would transport their people on horses and trains down to the South. And why did you have to be 18 to get free papers? Because at 18, you were considered an adult. How do I know some of the stories? I actually am a bit of a historian. I really do I read a lot about the stories of things that happened during that time. I know from accounts from diaries that people wrote, stories that were told to William Still, who was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He wrote many stories down of things that happened to people long ago. Philadelphia is a great place for history. There's a company called the Philadelphia Library Company, and it's near South Street. And they have stories of things that happened during that time, diaries of people who lived on South Street in Fitzwater and around there during that time. Where did Hanna and her family live? They lived right off of South Street in Philadelphia around 11th and South. There were a lot of horse stalls there at that time. There was a lot of places where people would come to get their horses shoed because they didn't really have cars then. They had horses. And said, how old was the little girl when she was going to be kidnapped? She was about 10 or 11. Patty rollers came around. They were very specific to target children who weren't old enough to be detected. Like if they took them down south, they would just blend in with the other workers. And they would take them very young. They didn't want them too old, but they wanted them young enough where they could train them to do the work in the South and they would be okay. Why were they called patty rollers? I'm not sure why they were called patty rollers. I think they were called patrollers, and they would just shorten it and call patty rollers. Sometimes when people talk, that's what they do. Oh, thank you, Colin. Colin says you explained the story so well. I can imagine the scenes in my head. Thank you, my darling. I appreciate that. Oh, is it hard to be a storyteller? Yes, it is. Because you have to remember a lot of stories and a lot of details. Grace asks, are there still bad people? Yeah, there are. But there are just as many good people, maybe even more, my darling. Why are you interested in this topic? I'm interested in the stories of people basically because I really feel like there's a lot of things that are told about people and they make them seem like they're not real. You know, no one is just all good or all bad. And even patty rollers, I mean, back then they thought that they were doing a good thing. If someone told you that, you know, these people are bad and if we get them off the streets, it's better for them to be owned by other people. And if you were told that all your life, you wouldn't know the difference. You wouldn't know the fact that it's not right to just look at a person for the color of their skin and decide that you could take them away or to take people away from their parents. But first you have to look at them as people. And unfortunately, during that time, there were some folks who wanted to divide folks, and they would divide them by the color of their skin. They may divide them by whether the way they think, the way they look, if they were rich or poor. And when you know the whole story of a person, then you can care more about them and you can understand and move beyond that. If you know how people acted during that time, you have a better understanding of what was going on. But I will say this, that just like there were people who were taking children away and all that, there were also people who were protecting them, like Mr. Fletcher, who protected Addie Mae. They saw themselves as part of a community, and they saw the children in that community as their children too, and they protected them. Now, Addie Mae wasn't related to Mr. Fletcher, but She was a part of his community. So he looked after her. And you children are blessed to have people who are like that too, who are looking after you. Now, while we still have time, let's talk about a little bit closer to the time that we live in now. There was a man. His name was Cecil Bassett Moore. Cecil B. Moore. If you go to Philadelphia if you're near Columbia, it used to be Columbia Avenue, but around Temple University and further down, you'll see that there is a street called Cecil B. Moore Avenue. Have you ever looked at the streets and wondered, why did they name that street after him? I'm going to tell you a story about Mr. Moore. It's called Cecil B. Moore and Girard College. Now, little Richard went for a walk with his big Pop Richard. And they went to Temple's campus. On Temple's campus, there was a restaurant where they could sit and they could have ice cream. But while little Richard was walking with Big Richard, he said, "Pop, who's that man on the sign?" On the sign, there was a picture of a man with a big cigar in his mouth and a big old hat. And he was pointing his finger. Now, Big Richard looked at him and smiled, and he said, "That's Cecil B. Moore." "Who's that?" "I'll tell you all about him. Come on, grandson." And he took him in the shop and bought him ice cream and sat him in the chair. And he said, "Well, long time ago, around 1958 or so, there was a college. Well, it's still there. You know Girard College?" "Yeah, my friend goes there." "Mm-hmm. Well, there was a time when little boys like you couldn't go to Girard College because it was written into the will of Stephen Girard, the man who started Girard College, that only little orphan white boys could go." "Why?" "Because see, back then, they didn't think that black boys and black girls could think like that, or girls could think like that at all. Now, there was a man who was once a Marine. I knew him quite well. His name was Cecil B. Moore. That's the man that you saw up on the sign. Now, he was born in West Virginia. He came here to Philadelphia and he went to Temple. But before he went to Temple Law School, he used to work he would distribute alcohol to different places all around. And he got to know all the people in North Philadelphia. And as he got to know them people, he got to see they were good people. And he didn't know why this fancy school wouldn't allow children who lived in the neighborhood of that school to go to school there. Their brains were just as good as any other child. And so he and some people called the Philadelphia Freedom Fighters started a protest around Girard College. They marched all around that campus with big old signs. "You mean like the Black Lives Matter people?" And then Big Richard looked at him and said, "Yes, but they were peaceful protesters. They weren't rioters. There's a difference. Protesters are people who are trying to let other people know bad things that are happening in the community. Rioters are people who cause vandalism and burn up stuff and cause violence. But that's not what Mr. Moore was doing. He had them marching around there with signs to let others know about the wrongdoings that were happening at Girard College and that it was unfair." Now, he was not just marching around Girard College, though. He was going to court to try to get things changed. Yes, he was. I know, because I was one of them. I once marched around Girard College. You did, Papa? Sure enough did. And I was proud to do it. Well, there were some that got arrested, but they got arrested because they tried to climb over the wall. But most of us, we was just marching around, letting others know what was going on. That was in 1965. And we didn't stop until 68, when the first Black boys got a chance to go to Girard College. Wow, that's neat, Pop. Yeah. You knew Cecil B. Moore? Sure did. He was a good man. He was funny, though. He had a real deep, gravelly voice. Kind of like yours, Pop. Yeah, son. Kind of like mine. I was really, really proud to be one of those that marched. Now, Richard, you got to make me a promise that when you see things that are wrong, that you'll stand up too. But always be peaceful. You hear me? Yes, Pop. And little Richard finished his ice cream cone. And as they walked back home, he asked his grandfather to tell him more about the North Philadelphia neighborhood that he grew up in. There's something special when your elders tell you the story of where you live. Ashe, which means I agree. Ashe. Now, Cecil B. Moore and Girard College is a very, very old story. There's a lot of things that weren't right when people first started them. Now, Stephen Girard had a good idea to turn his mansion into a school for children who were orphaned, poor children who wanted to learn and who needed a good start in life. But back then, they didn't think that Black people were smart enough. Or again, they didn't see Black people as human beings a lot of times. And because of that, they didn't think that they should be able to go and to be a part of such a great institution. Cecil B. Moore and other Black lawyers and people who lived in the community said, this is wrong. We need to change it. And there are a lot of times, again, it goes back to community. If you know that something wrong is happening in your community, it's all right to protest. It's okay to make signs. It's okay to do marches. It's okay to do speeches. But it's never, never okay to cause damage or to hurt other people, because that's not what it's about. If you really want to change things, you have to do it peacefully. And again, you can be loud. You can say how you feel. You can march. You can do all those things. Because a lot of times, if it weren't for children protesting, women protesting, and men protesting, things wouldn't change. They would stay the same, good and bad. We need to move on. And the way we move on is by talking, is by telling folks what's wrong, and by making those changes. And it's not easy to make changes, because sometimes if people are used to doing things a certain way, it's hard for them to change. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to change. And Cecil B. Moore was proof of that. He was a great lawyer, and he was a great man. In fact, he was even on city council. And he was on city council till 1979. And when he passed away, but he fought all that time for the rights of people in Philadelphia, especially in his North Philadelphia community around Temple University, because he loved it there and he loved the people there. Let's see what questions you guys have. So you're basically a history teacher. You know what, Ryan? I guess I am in a way. We consider ourselves oral historians. Historians are people, we are teachers of history, yes. Thank you, Elise. Elise said that I'm her favorite storyteller. Thank you, baby. I appreciate that. How many children were kidnapped? You know what? They don't even know the amount of children who kidnapped. Yes, there's still the school, Girard College. It's on Girard Avenue between, I'd say like 17th Street down. In fact, you can see Girard College if you go down Girard Avenue. Oh, do I memorize all this? Yes, I do try to. Every once in a while, I'll mess up on some facts, but not very often. Have you ever met someone you told a story about? I never got a chance to meet Cecil B. Moore, but I did get a chance to see him before he passed away, but I never got a chance to meet him. I have met some Fannie Lou Hamer. I've told stories about her. She was a civil rights activist. She was actually one of my aunt's best friends. And when I was a little girl, I never knew that Miss Fannie Lou was famous. She was just this really nice lady who liked me and thought I was a smart little girl and would talk to me and tell me stories. She was a beautiful lady. I loved Miss Fannie. Fannie Lou Hamer did a lot of things, including helping people to get rights to vote in the South when they were being discriminated against. But I never knew that she was a civil rights activist till after I was a grown woman. All I knew is that she was this really nice lady. Did we have any more questions? Let's see. Where were some of the hiding places? Along the back alleys around South Street and Fitzwater Street in Center City, Philadelphia. You can still walk along the alleys and see some of them. They were like little cubbies where children could scoot themselves down into. But those are some of the hiding places. Some of them, they could go into different people's stores, but they look like little cupboards and stuff, but they were just big enough for children to fit into. Those were some of the hiding places. They were kind of like the hiding places for the Underground Railroad too. Michael asked, how old is the recipe for pepper pot soup? We don't know, because pepper pot soup was derived from a soup that was made in Africa, and it's very, very old. It's as old as people cooking with fire. So that's millions and millions of years old. The children have to be a certain age for people to not to take them away, Cooper asked. Yeah, if they were 18, they could be free. Wasn't the North free? Oh, that's a very good question, Bean. The North wasn't always free. For a long time, the North had slavery too. In fact, there was slavery for a long time all throughout the United States. The North was, but in certain areas, people were free because they had either bought their freedom or they were given their freedom. But no, the North wasn't always free. What inspired me to be a storyteller? I come from a family of people who, that's what we used to do. We all would get together and we would basically sit there and talk about things that happened in the world and all around us. Somebody asked, where is Temple University? Temple University is at Broad and Columbia, from, well, Broad and Cecil B. Moore, all the way up to around 11th Street.
Hello, thank you so much. Those are such wonderful stories. I know we can all snap from our seats. We can't hear you, but we can feel your energy through your messages. Great questions. I love to read them all. And I know that we would have been blowing up the chat with them as well. So thank you, Mama Carla Wiley, for answering all those wonderful questions and telling your wonderful stories. Ashe, ashe. I appreciate your energy. All right. I know that we are wrapping up. So I just wanted to say thank you. And, you know, I know we can't see your faces, but hopefully we can see you back at the museum as soon as the world, you know, is able to right this pandemic that we are in. So please, you know, even though we can't see you, there's so many wonderful resources on our website. So take care, stay safe, and stay warm.
Thank you, little ones. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.